Hello, welcome to Garden Chronicles. My name is James David, and in today's video I would like to talk about this particular type of plant commonly known as Tassel Fern. Do check out on my earlier video concerning this particular plant in my earlier video. However, here it's very much more on a closer detail and some of the experiences and my opinion based on this particular plant care. First thing first, though it is identified commonly known as Tassel Fern, it is no way close to any of the ferns or of its characteristics. One thing for sure, it was classified first as Lycopodium and reclassified as Huperzia. So you may ask, why does all this information matters? One thing for sure, when it comes to ferns, they appears to be much more hardy and does somehow rough it out. This one, however, if you make one small mistake, the whole plant can get into shock and also easily dies. Hence, it's not an easy plant and I would not recommend it for new beginners. However, if you love challenges like me, I would suggest try it on, and the reward is greater when you feel that sense of accomplishment in a way to able to cultivate and grow this particular plant successfully. Now, in a factor when it comes to Huperzia, I would recommend you to try on your hands on this particular plant, botanically known as Huperzia phlegmaria. Why is this particular one is important is because I find that in comparison with so many other types of Huperzia, this one is the hardiest and the most easiest to care for. So for my tip number one, if you are new when it comes to Huperzias, get this particular one known as Huperzia phlegmaria, as they are much more hardy and able to handle much of a stress factor in comparison to other types that is available in the market. My tip number two is this: plant it upside down in reverse to planting it upward. I have made a huge mistake by planting it in this form. If you can notice over here, this is from my earlier video where I'm actually explaining on the medium and how I planted it, and this particular plant actually slowly withering away, and this is one of the problems that I actually face. What I have realized is that the existing strand did not die, and however one after another some of it started to turn yellow, but I have not seen any new strands appearing, and the existing ones that actually stayed alive slowly were growing longer, but somehow I find that it doesn't look very healthy. Due to the fact that the pot was much more wider, I had also faced some of the problems when it comes to watering, as when I noticed the medium dries out far more quicker in between watering. Hence, the coconut chips which I have used here as a medium seems to be a little bit more in the brittle factor, that it doesn't really soak and remain moist throughout the day. This imposed a new challenge to me when I find that invasive plants such as wild ferns, which some of the sporas has came into the picture, and it has sort of like invaded the whole pot, and the root ball seems to be creating a kind of a parasite situation, and as when it comes to this Huperzia, it was slowly going into dormancy. So finally I made up my mind and I have decided to repot this, and I find a lot of new young strands of these shoots appears to be actually forming at the bottom of the pot, and was actually seeking out a place for it to sprout out. And so it was such a sad event to find that a lot of these strands has actually turned yellow and withered away due to the fact that it did not appears to be sprouting out to the open space out of the pot. So one of the lessons that I actually learned from this is that always plant it in a way that even though the crown is at the top, the strands, the new shoots somehow follow the gravity and they tend to sprout out underground, sort of like under the pot. So it's best to actually hang the plant upside down, as new shoots appears more freely and easily, and that will actually helps new fronds to come, and the plant can much more grow well and thrive for the better. My tip number 3 is do not plant anything on top of the pot. You might find that, oh, there's an extra space here, why do I not plant something that they both can do, actually more on a combined or combination plants. Grave mistakes. The roots can overwhelm the other and somehow choke the Huperzia, and that particular plant will slowly wither away. Here you can see in a slow factor where slowly all the strands are turning yellow and is dying. So this is one of the grave mistakes which I have made. So please, if you can, do not plant anything on the top of the plant when at the bottom of the strand is actually upside down. Finally, I managed to repot this back to this original format, planting it upside down, and you can see that the new shoots appears to be coming out, and I find that this particular plant, it appears to be very healthy and rejuvenated back to its normal health. Now you can actually see that I'm actually using more of the sphagnum moss here, and I find that it actually aids together with coconut chips. Basically, these are the mediums that I use: coconut chips with sphagnum moss. Now you can actually notice, if you can see, there are new shoots that is appearing now, and it's freely growing out of it. This is roughly about 1-2 weeks time after repot. So this shows a good sign that the plant is actually happy. So my tip number 4 is, if you were to notice any dying or drying off the fronds, indicate the plant is actually dying. Any form of change of medium or any factor of stress, especially when it comes to over fertilize, or it's not happy with the current location, or lack of watering or over watering, the fronds can appear to be drying out or even rotting away. So this is one important sign to watch out for, to look out for new fronds that is appearing from the crown. So my tip number 4, look out for new growth. That is a sign to say the plant is happy. My tip number 5 for propagation. This is quite tricky. Unlike other ferns, this particular one actually sprouts out from the tip of the plant. If you notice here that I'm actually using the sphagnum moss as a medium, and I'm actually burying the tip of the plant, this Huperzia, into the sphagnum moss as a secondary potting medium. Do take note that I do not trim off the mother strand off, as it will actually gives the nutrients for the particular sprouts to grow. As you can see over here, the male fronds turning to be new shoots coming out from this side. This is the sign to know that this particular plant is ready to be propagated. So what I have done here is, I've taken this particular piece and I place it into the planting medium. Lightly place the moss at the part where the new growth is appearing, and the new roots will appear from there. So here you can actually see how I'm actually doing it. You don't really have to bury it very deep due to the fact that it may rot, so just lightly placing it, but somehow there is a room for it to have some aeration, at the same time something which is moist and slightly wet but not soaking wet, and that will actually cause this particular plant to slowly put out roots. Do take note that it may take many months, at least say about 3 months or so, to really see some difference taking place. In most cases there will be some chances of failure, so it will be more on a 50-50 factor whether the whole thing will actually take roots or not. However, I find that this particular Huperzia is much more hardy and easy to propagate in comparison to other types. There are challenges when it comes to propagation. There's basically two types of propagation. One is division, especially when it comes to crown, where you can actually split into two or three. The danger here is that due to stress and wrong way of division, you may lose the root ball. In some cases, when this kind of places, they can be very fragile and you can easily snap off the crown without the roots. So this is much more safer way and no danger of the plant from dying. There is another way of doing it where you can actually trim off these shoots and place them in a sealed container, a plastic container, where you can actually keep it in more of a greenhouse kind of a thing and keep it for at least about 6 to 8 weeks, and you can actually see the root taking place. So the problem which I have actually faced doing it is that they do tend to root, but the moment I open it up and let it acclimatize, the whole thing do burn out and not dry away because of change of atmosphere. It's not happy with it, as these are very fragile. So in a way, waiting for months, and at the end of the day it was a failed effect, so it's quite a little bit of discouraging. So in a way, I can explain to you that I find that this is much more easier way, and you really don't have to worry about it, and naturally it acclimatize by itself without much worry. So my tip number 5 is to use the Huperzia tips as a propagation by placing another pot below it and slightly anchor those tips so with the moss, so that it will actually take root easily, as it is much more reliable and successful in comparison to cuttings. My tip number 5 on propagation: use secondary pot as propagation station and place it below just where the frond tips are resting, and to make sure that you notice the formation of clustered effect on the tips, especially on the Huperzia, where new growth formation is appearing, as this ensure better and promising success in propagation. My tip number 6 is all about medium. Do take note to use only coconut chips or sphagnum moss or even both mixed together. Do not ever use aeroid mix or even soil. And there are cases where I've noticed that in some nurseries they will actually use a kind of a chicken wire coop, and then they just tie up the whole root ball and then just sell it like that. It's a bad deal to do so in thinking that the plant will survive or thrive, because eventually one by one those strands will just turn yellow or turn brown into crisp and just die, and you just lost the whole plant. So do take note that in most cases, if at all, I suspect so, where these are actually harvested in the wild and they are sold in this kind of condition where they are just tied up together in a ball kind of effect and just sold cheaply and loosely. I would suggest not to purchase those, as these are actually collected from the wild. However, I notice currently now the market where some of these plants are actually imported from Thailand or some other countries, and they are very well potted with correct medium. And if you do check on it to make sure that it's not planted in soil, and that is one of the big no-no, because the whole thing can just rot away. My tip number 7 is fertilizer. I can tell you what not to use. Do not use wood vinegar. I find that is the one thing of a big mistake that I use, and it actually killed the plant. Another thing that I've actually used, and I found that some people actually swear by it that it actually works, is Osmocote, which is known as slow release fertilizer. Now there is a kind of a mixed bag in this. I find that when it comes to Osmocote, the slow release fertilizer, it works best when the medium is dry, and when you water it, this slow release fertilizer works as when the medium is wet. Now can you imagine if the medium is constantly moist and constantly wet? The fertilizer is constantly been releasing its essence, this element of fertilizer into it. These chemicals actually overwhelm the plant and these fronds are actually burnt. So do pay a lot of caution on this when it comes to fertilizer. Not any and every single fertilizer actually works on this. I for now are very cautious in applying any fertilizer on it. If at all accidentally or lightly when they get sprayed, when I actually use foliar fertilizer on other plants, I'll just lightly apply on them. That also at least 2 weeks once, just lightly. I find that too much of it can actually burn this particular tassel ferns. So my tip number 7, do watch out when it comes to fertilizer. My tip number 8 is actually watering. Now the problem here is that when you plant this indoors, watering them lavishly is going to be a lot of problems. Actually these ones are actually growing them outdoor here, and so I can just pour water on it as much as I like, and this is actually a cascading effect when it's actually planted upside down. The factor here is that when it comes to indoor, when placing them, do take note that you can water it at least once a week. Take it in a sink or a bathtub and really give a good rinse on this particular plant, as these are thirsty plant. Do take note that they will appear a little bit like a faded or transparent. That is to say that this particular plant is very thirsty. The main factor here is actually the medium. If the medium is not correct, you are actually doomed in a fact where they can either rot if they are overwatered or dry up if the medium is too dry, especially when it comes, even for a correct mixture, when it comes to coconut chips, the one that I had earlier, they all have dried up, and though I have watered them heavily, the thing here is that the chips are not absorbing those moisture, hence it's just drain out immediately as it's water, and the whole root ball is actually thirsty. So once in a while checking on these factors actually help the plant in the long run. Hence my tip number 8, watering it lavishly and check on the medium to make sure that the medium is moist. My tip number 9, bright and indirect sunlight. One of the most important things here is that these do need light, sunlight especially, so lacking which they can easily rot. At the same time, too much of sun, they can actually turn yellow and sometimes dry away. So getting the right balance is important. Something similar like staghorn fern, where if they do not get the right element, they will just either get rotten or dried up. So this is one of the challenges that you have to face. I actually find that at least about 6 hours of light, either early morning or evening, in a way not direct sunlight, I find that they do very well as hanging potted plants at the side of the balcony or something where it is semi-shaded, and this is actually helps the plant. One of the things that you can actually note is the color of the leaves. If it's too hot, they turn yellow, and if it's too shaded, it will be more like lime green, and it's a bit lanky, and you can see that they are not happy. In a way, that will be the sign to know that the plant is not receiving bright indirect light. Another factor that I've noticed, which is very much funny, in a way to say that lacking which of bright indirect light can also add stress to this plant, and I find that in most cases pest attacks seems to take place when lack of bright light. So do take note that when it comes to pests, especially mealybug, scale insect, and at times sometimes even white flies comes on them when they are not receiving the element of good light and rain. So these are the factors that you have noticed, that if the plant is stressed, pest attack is actually very prominent. So that is my tip number 9. Do watch out for pests and correct them according to the lighting needs. Finally, my tip number 10 is to purchase the plant that is been already acclimatized at your garden condition. In most cases, when it comes to Huperzia, I find that they are highland plants, meaning to say that they come from a high altitude with cold temperate region. And this is actually very important because the aftershock, if in case that you are cultivating them in a lowland climate zone, these plants do not do well when they are stressed. So watch out and look out for those that is already been acclimatized at least for minimum 1 to 2 months time, and you can actually see the telltale signs that when they are stressed, these fronds actually turn out to be either strongly burnt under the bright sunlight or even wither away. So these are the factors that you have to watch out for before purchasing the plant. Now I have come to the end of my video. If you have any questions, do put them in a comment below and I'll try my best as my ability to answer according to my experience and my knowledge. If you can, I would really appreciate if you can click like and subscribe my channel. Here I'm actually placing all the pictures of my plants in my experiences of how I have cultivated these Huperzias over the years. So see you again and have a nice day. Take care and bye.